I never thought my life would end up in a mess like this. I was a simple man with simple dreams. I thought I'd found the love of my life in Maria. We met in college, fell in love, and after years of dating, decided to tie the knot. I thought I knew her well, thought I knew her heart and soul. But life has a way of showing you just how blind you can be. Maria and I had been married for 3 years, but our relationship had started feeling off not too long after our second anniversary. She was distant, often consumed with her new job at a high-end interior design firm. I was proud of her success. She had worked hard to get where she was. But pride quickly turned to suspicion when she started spending late nights at business dinners, often with her boss, Evan. I wasn't the type to get jealous, but something about her closeness with Evan bothered me. He was suave, rich, and had the kind of magnetic personality people gravitated towards. When Maria talked about him, there was a spark in her eye that had faded when she looked at me. I shrugged it off initially. Why wouldn't she be excited about someone who was helping her career? But eventually, the dinners turned into work weekends, and that's when the doubts grew. Little by little, her affections toward me dwindled, and our once passionate love life felt like a distant memory. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home hoping to unwind and spend a little time with Maria. But as usual, she wasn't there. I called her phone, and it went to voicemail. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach as I sat alone in our living room, waiting for her return. Around midnight, she walked through the door, barely acknowledging me as she murmured a tired "good night" and headed straight to bed. The next morning, I confronted her. I didn't come out and accuse her of anything. I wasn't there yet, but I did ask if there was something she wanted to tell me, if there was a reason she seemed so distant lately. She brushed me off, saying I was overreacting. "It's just work, Leo," she said with an exasperated sigh. "You know how intense things have been since the new project started." She was convincing enough, and I decided to let it slide. But the doubt was still there, gnawing away at me, whispering that something was terribly wrong. Days turned into weeks, and nothing changed. Maria became more and more secretive, often leaving the room to take phone calls or suddenly changing plans when I'd suggest we spend time together. My mind was in a constant state of turmoil, battling between trusting my wife and the mounting suspicion that she was hiding something from me. Then came the night that confirmed my worst fears. It was a Saturday, and I had finally managed to get Maria to agree to a date night. I had it all planned out, a cozy restaurant downtown where we used to go when we were dating. But hours before we were supposed to leave, she called me from work. "I'm so sorry, Leo," she said, sounding genuinely disappointed. "Evan needs me to stay late tonight. We're under a tight deadline." "Rain check?" Something inside me snapped. It wasn't anger, it was more of a cold, detached clarity. I told her it was fine, but as soon as I hung up, I felt a surge of determination. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it would be. I waited until late that night, knowing the time Maria had told me she'd be working. Then I drove to her office building. I parked a little distance away and waited, my heart pounding as I watched the entrance. Around 11 p.m., I saw them, Maria and Evan, walking out together, laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. I watched as they got into his car, and in that moment, everything I had feared became real. I tailed them, feeling both sick and furious, as I kept my distance, following them through the dimly lit streets until they pulled into a hotel parking lot. They got out of the car and headed inside, oblivious to the fact that I was watching. I felt a pang of betrayal so deep it was almost physical. She hadn't even bothered to try to hide it. The next day, I didn't confront her. I couldn't, not yet. I needed a plan. I needed her to feel the same devastation, the same helpless rage that was now coursing through my veins. A few days later, Maria's younger sister, Carla, called me. She had just moved back into town and wanted to catch up. Carla and I had always been close, perhaps too close at times. She was beautiful, witty, and had always had a bit of a wild streak. She was Maria's polar opposite in many ways, but I had always respected the boundaries of our relationship. Until now. When I met Carla for coffee, the idea was already there, simmering in the back of my mind. I would use Carla to get back at Maria. It was a twisted, reckless plan, but the desire for revenge had taken over every rational thought I had. As we talked, I let her know about the struggles in my marriage. I didn't mention the affair outright, but I let enough slip for her to know that things were far from perfect. I could see the sympathy in her eyes, the way she reached out to touch my arm, offering comfort. I knew then that I had her. Over the next few weeks, I spent more and more time with Carla. We went out for drinks, took long walks, and I let her in on parts of my life that Maria had once held close. I could feel us getting closer, and I didn't stop it. If anything, I encouraged it. One night, after a few too many drinks, Carla leaned in and kissed me. I didn't resist. In that moment, all thoughts of morality and loyalty were swept away. I wanted Maria to know the kind of betrayal I had felt. I wanted her to feel the same crushing heartbreak that had consumed me. The next morning, I woke up feeling both victorious and hollow. Carla lay beside me, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing. I knew this wasn't over. I needed Maria to find out, and I needed her to feel every ounce of the pain she had inflicted on me. So, I set things up. I left subtle clues, messages, receipts, hints that Carla and I had been spending time together. I knew Maria would eventually piece it together, and when she did, I wanted to be there to see her face, to watch as the realization dawned on her. It didn't take long. A week later, Maria confronted me, fury etched into every line of her face. She accused me of cheating, of betraying her with her own sister. And for the first time, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. I looked her in the eye, and I told her that I knew about her and Evan. I watched as her expression shifted from anger to shock, to a hollow, empty despair. In the silence that followed, I felt a strange calm. I had finally evened the score, finally made her understand the depth of her betrayal. But as I looked at her, I realized that the revenge I had sought hadn't brought me any peace. If anything, it had left me feeling more broken than ever. Maria stood there, silent, her face pale as she absorbed what I'd just said. I could see the denial flicker in her eyes, but I had all the proof I needed. I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected, no sense of triumph, just an empty, gnawing ache in the pit of my stomach. "How long have you known?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. I shrugged, keeping my expression unreadable. "Long enough," I said coldly. "Long enough to know you've been lying to my face every day, pretending like everything's fine while sneaking around with Evan." Maria's gaze dropped to the floor, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. But I didn't feel pity. I couldn't. I'd gone too far down this path to feel anything but a hollow sense of justice. "But, Carla?" she choked out, her voice breaking. "You knew, and you did this with my own sister?" I felt a twist of guilt, a pang of something I couldn't quite name. But I forced it back. "I wanted you to know how it feels," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. "I wanted you to understand what it's like to be betrayed by someone you love. I wanted you to see that you're not the only one capable of hurting someone they care about." She didn't respond, and for a moment, the room was filled with a thick, suffocating silence. I could feel my own anger starting to wane, replaced by an overwhelming exhaustion. This whole ordeal had drained me, and as I looked at Maria, I saw someone I barely recognized. She was no longer the woman I'd fallen in love with, but a stranger who had broken something sacred between us. "I never wanted this," she said finally, her voice a hollow whisper. I don't even know how it happened. Evan made me feel like I mattered again, like I was special. And I know that's not an excuse, Leo, but I don't know how else to explain it. I didn't want to hurt you. Her words stung, but I forced myself to keep a straight face. Well, you did. And now, we're here. A part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her that her excuses didn't matter, that nothing she said could justify what she'd done. But I was tired of fighting. I was tired of everything. The anger, the bitterness, it had all consumed me, and now that it was over, all I felt was emptiness. So what now? She asked, her voice trembling as she looked at me with pleading eyes. I shook my head, unable to find an answer. The truth was, I didn't know what came next. I had been so focused on revenge, so consumed by the desire to make her feel my pain, that I hadn't thought beyond this moment. Now, standing in the ruins of our marriage, I realized that I had no idea where to go from here. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I need some time to think. With that, I turned and walked out, leaving Maria standing alone in our living room, her face pale and her eyes filled with tears. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. The satisfaction I had expected was nowhere to be found, replaced instead by a hollow ache that seemed to grow with each passing mile. Over the next few days, I stayed with a friend, avoiding Maria's calls and messages. I wasn't ready to face her or myself. The guilt was starting to eat away at me, and the reality of what I had done to Carlo weighed heavily on my conscience. She had trusted me, confided in me, and I had used her in the most despicable way possible. In my quest for revenge, I had hurt someone who had nothing to do with the betrayal, someone who had only ever been kind to me. Finally, after days of silence, I decided to reach out to Carla. She deserved an explanation, and I owed her an apology. We met at a small cafe, and as soon as I saw her, the guilt hit me like a tidal wave. She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and hurt, her eyes searching mine for answers. Leo, what's going on? She asked, her voice barely concealing the pain beneath the surface. You've been acting so strange lately, and I don't understand. I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. Carla, I owe you an apology. I haven't been honest with you. The truth is, Maria and I have been having problems. Serious problems. And I paused, struggling to find the right way to explain the unexplainable. What kind of problems? She pressed, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at me, sensing that there was more to the story. I hesitated, but I knew I couldn't lie to her any longer. I found out that Maria was having an affair. With her boss, Evan. I was hurt, angry, and I did something terrible. I used you, Carla. I used our time together as a way to get back at her. And for that, I am so sorry. The words hung in the air, heavy with regret. Carla's face turned pale, and she looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and hurt. You used me? Just to get back at Maria? I nodded, unable to meet her gaze. I know it was wrong. I was blinded by anger, and I wasn't thinking straight. But that's not an excuse. You didn't deserve to be dragged into this, and I'm sorry. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just sat there, staring at me, her eyes filled with tears. Finally, she stood up, looking at me with a mixture of sadness and anger. You're right, Leo. I didn't deserve this. None of us did. With that, she walked out of the cafe, leaving me alone with the weight of my actions. I had hurt everyone in my life, Maria, Carla, even myself. And for what? A hollow sense of revenge that had done nothing but tear apart the lives of the people I cared about. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself drifting through life, unsure of where to go from here. Maria had moved out of our apartment, and we hadn't spoken since that night. I heard through mutual friends that she was staying with a cousin, trying to piece her life back together. Part of me wanted to reach out to her to see if there was any way we could fix what was broken. But I knew that was impossible. Too much had happened. Too many lines had been crossed. Our marriage was beyond saving, and I had no one to blame but myself. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, the weight of everything finally hit me. I had lost everything: my wife, my dignity, my sense of self. In my quest for revenge, I had become someone I didn't recognize, someone I didn't want to be. I spent the next few months in a state of reflection, trying to make sense of the choices I had made. Therapy helped, as did reconnecting with old friends who reminded me of the person I used to be. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I found a new job, moved to a new city, and started fresh. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the guilt still weighed heavily on me, but I was determined to move forward. Maria and I eventually divorced, and I haven't heard from her since. As for Carla, I sent her a letter, apologizing for everything and asking for her forgiveness. I don't know if she ever read it, but I hope she did. I hope she knows that I am truly sorry for the pain I caused her. In the end, I learned a harsh lesson about love, betrayal, and the destructive power of revenge. I realized that forgiveness of others and of myself was the only way to truly move on. It's been a long journey, but I'm finally beginning to feel like myself again. And while I'll always carry the scars of that painful chapter, I've come to accept them as part of my story, a story of mistakes, redemption, and ultimately, healing. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could feel Maria's gaze boring into me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears as she processed the revelation. The moment stretched out, each second heavy with all the things left unsaid between us. "How long, Leo?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How long have you known?" I looked away, unable to hold her gaze. "Long enough," I replied coldly. "Long enough to know you've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back while pretending to be my wife." I could feel a surge of anger rising, but I fought to keep my voice steady. Maria's face crumpled, and a tear slid down her cheek. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, her voice breaking. I don't know how it happened. Evan made me feel important, like I mattered. I didn't mean to hurt you, Leo. I never wanted this." Her words felt like a slap in the face, each one a reminder of the betrayal that had shattered our lives. I wanted to lash out, to tell her that her excuses meant nothing, that no explanation could ever justify what she'd done. But instead, all I felt was an overwhelming sense of emptiness. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I said quietly, my voice laced with bitterness. "You've destroyed everything we built together. Our marriage, our trust. It's all gone." She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand to stop her. "And don't even try to justify it," I added, my voice hardening. "You don't get to play the victim here. You made your choices, and now you're going to live with them." I saw her shoulders slump as she looked down, defeated. For a brief moment, I almost felt a twinge of sympathy, a pang of regret. But I quickly pushed it aside, reminding myself of all the pain she had caused me. "Then why, Carla?" she whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of confusion and hurt. "Why did you, with my sister?" I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "I wanted you to know what it feels like," I replied coldly. "I wanted you to feel the same pain, the same betrayal that you put me through." Maria's eyes widened in shock, and I could see the devastation written all over her face. For the first time, I saw the full weight of her actions sink in, and it was almost satisfying to see her feel even a fraction of the anguish I'd endured. But as I looked at her, standing there broken and vulnerable, I felt a pang of regret. This wasn't who I was. I had allowed my anger and hurt to turn me into someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of inflicting pain just for the sake of revenge. And as I stood there, looking into the eyes of the woman I had once loved more than anything, I realized that nothing I did could ever make things right. The bitterness drained out of me, leaving only a hollow ache in its place. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. I don't know what happens now, I said quietly. But I need some space. I need time to figure things out. With that, I left, leaving Maria alone in the ruins of our marriage. In the days that followed, I tried to keep myself busy, avoiding Maria's calls and messages. I crashed on a friend's couch, throwing myself into work and distracting myself with anything I could find. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the weight of my own guilt. One evening, after a long day at the office, I found myself sitting alone in my car, staring at my phone. Carla's number was highlighted on the screen, my finger hovering over the call button. I knew I owed her an explanation. She had been an innocent bystander, dragged into my twisted scheme for revenge. And now, I had to face the consequences of my actions. I took a deep breath and pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Leo? Carla's voice was tentative, filled with a mixture of confusion and worry. Hey, Carla, I replied, my voice heavy with regret. I'm so sorry. I know I owe you an explanation. There was a pause, and I could almost feel her trying to make sense of my words. I don't understand, Leo. What's going on? I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the truth. I found out about Maria and Evan. I was hurt, angry, and I wanted her to feel the same pain I was feeling. So I used you, Carla, and I'm so sorry. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, Carla spoke, her voice laced with hurt and disbelief. You used me? Just to get back at Maria? Yes, I admitted, the weight of my actions pressing down on me like a heavy stone. I know it was wrong. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I let my anger get the best of me. But that doesn't excuse what I did to you. You didn't deserve this, and I'm so sorry. There was another pause, and I could hear her struggling to hold back tears. You have no idea how much this hurts, Leo. I trusted you, and you used me like I was nothing. Her voice cracked, and I felt a pang of guilt that went deeper than anything I had ever felt before. I know, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I know I hurt you, Carla, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I needed you to know that I'm truly sorry. She didn't say anything, and I knew there was nothing more I could do. Finally, I heard her take a shaky breath. Goodbye, Leo. The line went dead, and I sat there, alone in the silence, my heart heavy with regret. I had hurt everyone in my life, Maria, Carla, even myself, and for what? A hollow sense of revenge that had brought me nothing but misery. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions, regret, guilt, anger, and finally, a sense of numbness that settled over me like a heavy fog. Maria moved out of our apartment, and we filed for divorce soon after. I thought I'd feel relief, maybe even a sense of closure, but instead, all I felt was emptiness. I realized that I had been living in a state of denial, using my anger as a shield to avoid facing the truth. I had lost myself in my quest for revenge, and in the process, I had hurt the people who had once meant the most to me. It was a harsh lesson, one that forced me to confront the darker parts of myself that I had tried so hard to ignore. In an attempt to find some semblance of peace, I decided to seek therapy. The sessions were painful, forcing me to confront the choices I had made and the reasons behind them. I began to unravel the tangled mess of emotions that had driven me to such destructive actions, slowly piecing together the person I used to be. I also reached out to old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage. They welcomed me back with open arms, reminding me of the man I had been before all of this, a man who was kind, thoughtful, and capable of love. Little by little, I began to rebuild my life, finding solace in the small moments of joy that had once seemed so elusive. Maria and I finalized our divorce, parting ways amicably. I hadn't heard from her since, and I didn't expect to. She was a chapter of my life that I had to close, a painful memory that I would carry with me, but no longer allow to define me. As for Carla, I wrote her a letter, pouring out my heart and apologizing for the pain I had caused her. I didn't expect her to forgive me, but I hoped that one day she might find it in her heart to let go of the hurt I had inflicted. I knew I couldn't change the past, but I could at least take responsibility for it. Months turned into a year, and I found myself slowly healing. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and began to focus on the things that truly mattered: friendship, honesty, and self-respect. The scars of my past remained, but I had come to accept them as a part of my journey, a reminder of the lessons I had learned and the person I had become. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sun set over the city, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I had been through hell, lost everything that once defined me, but I had survived. And in the process, I had found something even more valuable: a deeper understanding of myself and a newfound appreciation for the power of forgiveness. Looking back, I realized that revenge had been a poison, one that had nearly consumed me. But through forgiveness of Maria, of Carla, and most importantly, of myself, I had found a way to heal. It was a long, painful journey, but one that had ultimately led me to a place of peace. In the end, I had learned that love, betrayal, and forgiveness are all part of the human experience. And while my scars would always remain, I knew that I had the strength to move forward, to build a new life, and to embrace the possibility of happiness once more.